everyone. Welcome to my presentation today. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoy this. The title of my presentation is The Manifestation of Body Anxiety in the Art of the Northern Renaissance. So sit back, relax, and please don't hesitate to ask any questions after the presentation. Anxieties regarding death, survival, and the promise or denial of resurrection were overwhelming concerns for everyone during the Middle Ages as well as into the early Renaissance. From nobility to peasantry, from pope to laity, their lives were mediated by the word of the Bible. They lived the literal and material interpretations of the gospel. The theory of resurrection was comforting to believers as it provided them with a satisfying ending to their challenging and grim existence. The idea that God could make whole and pure from what was once dead and decayed was an obsessive thought pattern. Eternal purity and beauty was powerful and meaningful, especially when compared to the ugliness of disease, decay, and deformity. The negative opposite reinforces the positive, allowing for the fantasy of beauty to become more fully appreciated. In this way, the imagery of Germany from the late Middle Ages through the early Renaissance focused on this dichotomy, beautiful versus ugly. Eventually, the theme of opposites became signs of good versus evil, human versus beast, and sacred versus profane. It is through these images that recurring motifs informed ideology. Ugliness became associated with all that was ill and evil. It became a negative sign of race, class, and gender. The ideal of beauty, on the other hand, was reinforced through images of nobility, purity, and spirituality. This presentation examines images from the Nuremberg Chronicle in an effort to prove that the imagery supported the German Renaissance ideology. A beautiful body is a holy body, while, on the other hand, an ugly body is a sign of corruption, evil, and other. The late medieval apprehension associated with their bodies underscored their anxieties about resurrection and self-identity. The Nuremberg Chronicle from 1493 informed its readers about geography, religion, and history, as well as about cultural and social perceptions. The images were drawn from an elite male perspective emphasizing a privileged position and power. The representation of the other, whether they were Jews, diseased, disabled, racially or physically different in any other way, underscored discrimination and inferiority. For example, this image of the final judgment emphasizes the contrast between the holy and the profane. The believers on the right side of the image meet the Creator in the final appointment and join together to enter the Messianic kingdom. They calmly walk towards the gates of paradise to an eternal life of bliss and peace. The damned, on the left, are those who were judged by Christ and condemned to the lake of fire. Their grotesque forms visually underscore their corruption and wrongdoing. Green gargoyles attack them as the relentless fires of hell surrounding their blistering bodies. The imagery informs the viewer of a holy difference that is defined by physical otherness. The saved are holy and therefore they are beautiful, protected by the attending angels as well as the grace of Christ. In contrast, the damned are evil in spirit and deformed in body. These associations were a recurring theme in medieval iconography. Holy and pure is beautiful, and in contrast, unholy is grotesque. It represents the other and all that is impure. The dichotomy between these extremes emphasizes their perceived purity through their physicality, providing visual signs for the invisible. The image John Apostle Evangelist illustrates the emphasis on the connection between beauty and holy. Saint John is depicted in his youth. His long golden hair flows below his shoulders. His face is smooth and beardless. He sits outside in a quiet landscape with a quill in hand, presumably to write his gospel. To his left is his symbol, the majestic eagle, which is readying to take flight. The overall beautiful, calm image underscores St. John's holy position. The Benwell College English translation of the Nuremberg Chronicle states, quote, John the Apostle and Evangelist, brother of James the Greater, and the most beloved of Christ, was called as a disciple in his younger years. As they say, he nullified the teachings of the Ebionites heretics who falsely claimed that Christ never existed before Mary. For John announced his godly nature, saying, "In the beginning was the Word." Unquote. This image of St. John, with an emphasis on his youthfulness, his fair skin and golden hair, clearly marks the visual association of his godliness and beauty as distinct from signs of the profane, such as evil, decay, and otherness. According to the Gospel, St. John was not just holy, but he was also the preferred apostle of Christ, elevating his holiness and his beauty to a whole other level. The signifiers for the profane are also manifest in terms of gender. The female image was also a sign of evil and otherness, a symbol of perceived potential dangers that are negatively depicted in imagery as well. For example, devil and woman on horseback. This image attempts to visually remind the viewer of what was considered to be the potential threat of women, the fertile giver of life as well as the originator of sin in the spirit of Eve and the fall of man. In this image, the woman's prominent breasts project out towards the viewer, emphasizing her physical otherness. Her face is contorted in fear as she is carried off on a horse with what seems to be the devil himself. He has a grotesque body of a man combined with beastly attributes. He has 2 sets of horns, one pair from a bull and the other from a ram, scrawny chicken legs, as well as a horrendous monster-faced knee. The implication seems clear. The woman is a temptress. She is evil and therefore brings evil to her. The English translation from the Belvoir College reads, quote, "A wicked sorceress who lived in England died, and while the priests were singing the psalm, she was terribly pulled about by the devil, who sat on a horrible horse and rode her through the air. And for fully 4 miles a fearful and terrifying cry was heard." Unquote. This implies that even the sacred singing of the priests cannot save that female soul. The patriarchal culture of the early Renaissance viciously embraced this barbaric and chauvinist ideology. The visual denigration of the female perpetuated misogynist behavior and negative associations, resulting often in violent and sometimes fatal witch hunts. These images from northern Germany between the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance provided visual examples of German ideology through the denigration and stereotyping of others. If beauty and purity signified holiness to the northern European believer, then all that was diseased, broken, and ugly was deemed unholy. These concerns over resurrection and anxieties over materiality and identity were present as far back as the 3rd century. In her article, Images of Resurrection Body in the Theology of Late Antiquity, art historian Caroline Walker Bynum discusses the teaching of Tertullian in his treatise De Resurrectione Carnis. Bynum argues, quote, "Tertullian also sees resurrection as radical transformation. Even before death, those who fast prepare themselves not only for prison and martyrdom, but also for the resurrection. Slender flesh will go more easily through the narrow gate of heaven. Lighter flesh will rise more quickly. Drier flesh will experience less petrification in the tomb." Unquote. The connection between a clean, unblemished body and the holiness of resurrection has been inextricably linked for centuries. This material link to a metaphysical afterlife has helped believers alleviate their own anxieties about the process of death and decay. Bynum also states, quote, "In the deepest sense, then, resurrection belief expressed a need to remove the threat of not only decay, but of all natural processes. Death was horrible not because it was an event that ended consciousness, but because it was part of an oozing, disgusting, uncontrollable biological change. It was the final permutation in a body that was forever in process, eating, growing, giving birth, sickening, and aging." Unquote. In this way, the ongoing processes of the human body was a source of mystery that evoked apprehension and fear. The drive to not only preserve it, but to align it with the beautiful and holy was a matter of psychological survival. This presentation explored the images from the late medieval and early Renaissance to demonstrate how art supported the German Renaissance ideology. The anxiety over decay and putrefaction of the human body and the potential for resurrection created a survivalist association of the beautiful with the pure. In contrast, blemishes, deformities, and other abnormalities were stigmatized as bewitching, idolatrous, and evil, unwanted elements that were categorically credible and tangible through powerful images. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much for joining me.